Elena Agudio is a curator and a thinker, and it's high time, I think, that you are now part of our discourse series here. You proposed a lecture that actually inspired us all, related to something that many of us are doing and have to do almost every day, chopping onions or curating critical discomfort and the labor of repairing. Elena Agudio is a Berlin-based art historian and curator. She studied art history at the University of Venice, Ca' Foscari, and in 2010, she received her PhD in contemporary art and design. She's interested in curatorial practices as forms of troubling, with a focus on its performative and relational aspects. Actually, this idea of curating as a form of troubling has been very interesting for us. It troubled us, and we felt that some kind of troubling that we would like to share with others and that we would learn from you about. Mm-hmm. Since 2013, you've been artistic co-director of savoury Contemporary, an institution that is very important for us, very important in itself and very important for us also in our program, savoury Contemporary in Berlin. And there, as a co-director, you have curated many very relevant and interesting shows and co-curated exhibition projects, discursive programs and series. Recently, just one example, maybe related to our topic today, Ultrasanity, on madness, sanitation, anti-psychiatry and resistance. But many others, please go have a look at the website of savoury. There you will see that actually Elena has been responsible for very interesting feminist, anti-racist, and also very intellectual projects that really that are working on a curatorial practice of listening. Yeah, beside that, as I said, she's also a thinker. She has been teaching in different places. She writes in different contexts. And since 2017, you are actually teaching at the Weißensee School of Art in Berlin. It's wonderful to have you here. And I leave the space for you now. We are all looking forward to hearing your lecture on chopping onions.
Thank you, Nora. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for your kind and vibrant introduction, Nora. Thank you also to Beatrice, and again to you, Nora, for the invitation. I'm thrilled to be here tonight, but I have to admit that this is my, I guess also yours, 749th Zoom meeting, an online meeting, and so I'm afraid at some point some apocalyptic event may occur. I expect, I don't know, my laptop to explode. It was doing a lot of strange things to me today. So, but also could be that my voice will stop to speak or will leave me. But anyway, this digital exhaustion that is haunting me is also because in this past week at savoury we've been recording some very challenging, but also, of course, interesting book launches. And so I was confronting myself with the anxiety of being part on non-ephemeral events where things are recorded and then are kept there. And yes, this creates a little bit of stress in addition. So please bear with me if you feel my fatigue and my pressure. Actually, and I also show you some of these books that we book launched yesterday, with this one on Ultrasanity that you just mentioned. This one, no, it's an older one on rhythm analysis, this on hospitality, and actually today I will go more in this direction than in the one of hospitality. And then also there is a new book by Bonaventure, The Delusions of Care, that somehow is also related to this talk. I actually have a pile of books here, and maybe I will stop showing them and I will start with my presentation. So when Nora and Beatrice contacted me to participate and lecture in this ACM postgraduate program on educating, curating, and managing. And when I saw how many dear friends and colleagues already partook this series, I was humbled. But in particular, I was very pleased that I was called to be part of this module on curating as a collaborative and transformative practice. The short description that Nora and Beatrice shared with me in German, and I had to also a little bit translate it for myself, was reading: against the backdrop of social inequalities and ecological crisis, urgencies are the driving force of ideas that allow us to operate with other logics and to undermine or transcend the narrow boundaries of disciplines and institutions. So my practice as curator since its beginning has been very much informed, in fact, by these reflections on the possibility of transcending disciplinary boundaries and of interrogating the heuristic and disruptive power of art as a form of knowledge production. It has also been particularly focused, my practice, on putting equality issues in the room. I think the title of this module is Gleichheitsfragen in den Raum stellen. And in analyzing the deep asymmetries of this world and the geometries of power structures. But lately, after many years of curating, the operation in which I've been engaging primarily is one of self-reflection and of analysis and the embracing of the reality that curatorial projects for me are definitely non-straight paths, but are paths that are involving detours, dead ends, and roundabout, about in plural, I would say. So as Jane Baldwin beautifully said, I in fact strongly believe that the purpose of art is to lay bare the questions that have been hidden by the answers, so that its purpose is to complexify perspectives and find questions to answer that have been already given. For that reason, curatorial investigations, at least for me, but I think in general, are often like Holzwege, those tracks in the hood that are usually far from the main trajectories followed by people that are going in many different directions and are often, and that's the main issue, interrupted or diverted. There are strategies of tinkering, sometimes of irritation even, and are small acts of sabotage, also acts of queering, obviously. They might imply straying from the course, losing one's way, or simply posing in hesitation. And also they imply exploring zones in which binary oppositions begin to fade, and spaces where new meanings and values have not yet emerged. Sorry, not new meanings and values that have not yet emerged. So when Nora and Beatrice told me in particular that they were intrigued, as you just said again, Nora, to learn more about what I mean when I'm writing in my bio that I'm interested in curating as a form of troubling, but especially with the focus also on its performative and relational aspects. I decided to then try to explain that with this lecture. So I will do that by introducing you to some of my recent projects and by making evident how much my work has to do also with the troubling of my own positionality in particular. One that is obviously often awkward as a white European art historian that is acting in the context of an art space like Savvy Contemporary, and or anyway in the context of engaged and anti-discriminatory curating. So I should start sharing my screen so that we also see the presentation, and tell me if all it's good, if you're seeing it. I will now make it as a slideshow.
Yes, very well, thank you.
Okay. Yes, so for that reason, I decided to give this lecture, this rather strange title that you already read, Chopping Onions, Curating Critical Discomfort and the Labor of Repairing. And because I'm not sure that most of the people in this virtual room had the time to read or to pause on this short abstract that I sent, I would like to share it with you again. So, and it was of course also a little bit of a provocation. So nearly every savory recipe starts with the chopping of onions, clearing up the space, preparing the ingredients, planning a timeline. But it is when the tears start to flow and the eyes are burning that the real work begins. It is when an intense smell suddenly reaches your nostrils and gives you a sense of slight discomfort or distaste that creativity can take off and the labor commences. Maybe because I too often miss the opportunity of delving into the noblest alchemies of cooking, I've been starting to chop onions when I began to curate. In this lecture, I will ponder the labor of curating and its politics of affects. Curating to me not only means throwing questions in the room, troubling master narratives, and exercising political imagination, but as a white European art historian, also unlearning and setting yourself in a position of critical discomfort, opening up to practices of deep listening and welcoming the unexpected to happen, walking away from your comfort zone to navigate new contact zones. So this presentation will grapple with the understanding of curatorial practices as forms of troubling whose maieutic and insurgent forces lie in their relational and performative aspects. So, to be honest, so this dramatic and theatrical, but also very domestic image of the act of chopping onions and being unsettled by the tears that this provokes was inspired to me by the work of an artist. Of course, he was also inspired by the fact that we've been all locked home for more than a year, and I guess as most of you, I've been also chopping a lot of onions in this time, in these days. So yeah, we're speaking about this work of an artist, and of course you might even think of the work of Marina Abramovic and her film The Onion from 1996, but that was not the work I was inspired by, to use this metaphor, but the one of an artist whose work has been important for me and was part and central part of a project which some years ago, I think in 2018, I co-curated with my colleague Bonaventure, that always, his name is always coming back, and Denise Reiner at Savvy Contemporary. A project that is actually exactly this one, Whose Land Have I Lit On Now? Contemplations on the Notions of Hospitality. A project that was developed to address and question the ambiguities of a certain Willkommenskultur, Gastfreundschaft, that was central in public discourse in Germany, especially after Angela Merkel in 2015 pronounced these words, wir schaffen das, and then very shortly after, we were already hearing these words, das Boot ist voll, the boat is full. So even if we can make it, but no, actually now the boat is full. So the project tried to complicate the aporias of any practice of hospitality by analyzing the hostility that is hidden behind some processes of welcoming. So the artist was Munira also, and you can see her in this picture now, an artist who's seen irony and self-reflectivity as very central to a practice, and that works with video, painting, drawing, a lot with embroidery, but also with performative gestures. Before getting to the performance, I would like to also show you the work that, the main work that we installed in the exhibition, a work entitled Sama a Mas, and that was part of a series of double-sided patchwork curtains. So they were embroidered on both sides, also on the other side that you're not seeing here in this photo. And they were conceived by Munira to make reference to these drapes that are usually used in Beirut to shade houses from the sunlight, but also to hide private space from indiscreet eyes of neighbors or onlookers. So each of the two curtains was embroidered with particular three-lettered Arabic root words. So words that could be pronounced in different ways and that are open to different meanings, but that here we're also playing with the ambiguity of their juxtaposition. So on one, we had the word Malik, and the other side, Lakam, that was translating like king and to own. And on the other curtain, we had the words Ragbar and Gabar, desire and to vanish. So again, also a sort of a complex association of words. So Munira in the show was reflecting on the malleability of root words and the nuances of letters, exactly because she was trying to take up our invitation to engage with the ambiguities involved in certain acts of hospitality, and the very fact that we have been clearly also working with words and etymology, and we were going back to the Latin roots of the word guest. Remember, I guess you know that the Roman Latin word hospes means both guest, host, and stranger. And then it comes actually, it's very, very similar to the other word hostis, that means enemy, because both are deriving from a same Indo-European noun that is called ghostis. So we played a lot with those words, and we were also unfolding a chapter that was entitled I guest, I host, who is the ghost? And we were thinking about processes of zombification of guests. So she was very beautifully opening up to the potential of meaning that are at the heart of every word. And also these gates were functioning as entrance, as a threshold to the exhibition. Were very symbolically installed there, like to welcome people, but also to provoke these reflections on this idea of hostility within hospitality. So I was introducing the work of Munira, not exactly to talk about this work, but in particular, as I was saying, to make reference to a performance that she did at Savi the day of the opening, when actually the whole smell of onions spread around the whole space and stayed for a couple of days, and yes, made all our eyes very red. So that day of the opening, she decided to perform with her brother and cut onions for a few hours, I think even 4 hours or 5, letting the skin of the onions falling on the floor. So by doing so, she wanted to carry forward two opposite ideas. Its direct physical impact, the tears in the eyes, the strong smell, but also, of course, the memory of tear bombs thrown against the demonstrators, chemical weapons and gas using against civilian until today, and used also for ethnic cleansing. But also she wanted to carry another idea, the one of welcoming, obviously, via food and hospitality, because onions, it seems, they're one of the earliest cultivated crops in the world, and they were used to prevent thirst. They could be dried and preserved for later consumption since 5,000 years, it seems. So that was why she decided to do this performance. And I show you also other images, because of course during the opening it was very crowded. It's not like nowadays that we have fake openings. But then the intensity of this smell and these drops and tears was quite strong. So in my case, the reference to onions anyway was actually also meant to address the critical discomfort that I'm interested in, and I'm ready to be exposed to when curating, let's say, the work before the work or within the work. But also this infra-thin that is left in the space between the relations that are being opened and being enacted in any curatorial activity. So let me analyze these two perspectives, which I mentioned, and I'll do it. This is the book that I showed you, the real copy, because now it's in our hands. So, as Nora read from my bio, yes, I'm teaching at Weissense Kunsthochschule, and in particular this semester I've been teaching in the postgraduate program of Raumstrategien, spatial strategies, a course that was engaging with issues of restitution, reparations, and repair, as you can read, and was entitled The Labor of Repairing. This was the cover of the syllabus. There was no poster around. It was just for internal use of the students. And actually the image that you're seeing underneath is an image from Ariella Azulay and her work Errata. So in the seminar, together with the students, and our way of teaching is always very choral and very collective. With them, not only we tried to complicate the public discourse of restitution of artworks and manufacts to communities looted in colonial times by shifting the attention to the voices and the agency of those very communities, instead of always focusing on the European perspective, because unfortunately the discourse is often really yes, highjacketed by this European perspective. But also we considered the importance of embracing possibilities of communal healing and pondering the impossibility or possibility of psychocultural repair. So among the main reflection anyway that we had in the course were ones focusing on museographical institutions as durable structures of colonial formations. Obviously, against the backdrop of the crisis of European ethnographic museums, and in Berlin with the opening of the Humboldt Forum, we engaged with the possibilities of reading museums as crime scenes. And I can go then to the next slide. As crime scenes and questioning hegemonic narratives around colonial structures in institutions. The thing that I did with the students, talking about this, Tat museums als Tatorten, but also in a couple of radio programs that I curated. One that both went on Reboot FM and on an independent radio network in Berlin, and were part of a festival called Latitude on Air. The first one being a conversation between Ariella Azoulay and Bonaventure that was focusing on the relationship between large encyclopedic museum and imperialism. And I'm putting here a link, but obviously you can't click on it, but I can send you materials afterwards. And the second one, there was actually aired, I think in December, a couple of months ago, with Natasha Jinwala, Folakun Leoshun, and Maria Berrios, who was one of the curators of the last biennial that has been very clearly, especially in its chapter on the Gropius Bow, focusing on on this idea of the crime scenes and on museums as institutions built on multiple deaths. In fact, in their catalog, there is a quite strong curatorial, short but dense and poetic text that is describing this process of necropolitics of museums, and they are talking about those pieces of words being broken, their looted belongings that are continued to be displayed in small glass coffin. So in the context of, this course at Weissensee and these reflections also with other colleagues and even part of my curatorial praxis, I engage and I started to better engage with the possibility of formulating what critical discomfort in regard to museography is, and which are the different possibilities of infrastructural activism. In particular, this happened when I was reading and engaging with the work of Wayne Modest. I guess you students and also all the other professors in the room are familiar with his work. And also, not only in his writings, but also in his practice at the time as curator of the Tropenmuseum and director of the Research Center for Material Culture. So I selected a couple of paragraphs from this text that is published in a volume, an anthology called Across Anthropology, Troubling Colonial Legacies, Museum and the Curatorial. And that, of course, I could also share with you if you need. And I think, anyway, it's open access. You can find it even online. They seem a little bit long, but yes, I want to read them because I think they are important to understand this discomfort and this critical discomfort. So, we have created an engine of the museum around happiness and comfort, as if it is a nice thing. So people should come out and feeling good and happy. And it is not that people should come out of the museum feeling traumatized, but I see it as an investment in a critical discomfort. In a particular, a kind of critical discomfort about the taken for grantedness we have of ourselves. Much of the narrative of the constitution of Europeanness is that taken for grantedness. This is who we are, this is what we are, this is what we should be. It is such a strange thing that I think more museums need to be participating in this critical discomfort, this shaking up, this demand that we see and understand otherwise and in relation. There is a word out there and we share it. So this was the first thing that attract my attention, because obviously if contemporary spaces like savvy contemporary are often putting you in a position of discomfort as maybe a European visitor, obviously main museums and institutions, they really try to perform a certain pedagogical way of entertaining also people. The second quote, it's still extracted from the same text, says, to be honest, the museum of today is an uncomfortable space. You're constantly on the tip of your toes, not knowing, am I doing this right thing? Did I mobilize this right thing or that? But this discomfort is a generative space for us to imagine another kind of museum practice in the future. For me, this would be one particularly generative conjuncture. In the curatorial sense, that moment when politics comes together with a certain kind of action in order to reimagine another kind of future. I think we are in that right now. The question is how we hold onto that and push it to something that is productive rather than symbolic, and is also the risk. Wayne is continuing by also asking himself, what can be done? And he says, thinking with Moten, I've been wondering how museums can adopt a particular kind of critical positionality, but also about how to create, how to imagine, how to do, and to make anew. I'm at the stage now where I ask myself whether our institutional critique is enough. And that's where my struggle has taken me. Is critique enough? Because the burden should be a burden to be critical so that we can work it through. But it probably is also a burden to imagine, to create, and that I don't know how to do that yet. If you ask what's the curator's role is, that's probably what they should be doing. So imagining, getting into the space of continuously interrogating themselves about what can be done. So this important operation of questioning the role of the curatorial and of doing it from within. Modest is quoting Moten because Fred Moten, obviously, with his idea of the undercommon, has been extensively speaking about acting from within the university or within the institution and cracking it completely, but from the inside. And by also going beyond sterile exercises of institutional critique is still, for me, fundamental. I work as an independent curator and I am active at Savvy Contemporary as co-director of the space that is surely non-representing the institutional, maybe as Nora says, the para-institutional, and that is interested in cracking with dominant epistemologies and power structures. But it is exactly this troubling and this critical discomfort that lies at the center of our work. A critical discomfort that oftentimes I have personally to face in a different way compared to most of the colleagues I work with. And that entails a radical process of deconstruction and of unlearning certain privileges, certain canons, certain mindsets. And of course, yes, I mean me again, because as I said before, I'm one of the very few white European in that space. And on the top of that, I'm also classically trained as an art historian. So there is a lot to be undone. So in general, at Savi, we could say we sometimes practice curating as a form of troubling. We enact the figures of the killjoys. We engage with criticality and with disruption to foster the insurgency of alternative epistemologies and to provoke heuristic disturbances. But in my personal experience, one that I lived in particular during the unfolding of a 3-year project on feminist labor, on care work, on intersectional theory. I think in my particular case, I faced critical discomfort also in a different way, a way that unsettled me in a particular mode, and that pushed me to understand even more radically the importance of constantly questioning my position, my positionality, and of constantly being listening in order to trouble my narrative, in order to be able to curate in a way that is always polyphonic and choral, that is based on sympoiesis, making with, rather than on autopoiesis and self-making. So this slide, this image that you're seeing here is a picture of a performance that was not a performance, but was an exercise by Tracy Rose in the context of this project I was telling you about, a project entitled Speaking Feminisms. Later, it was continuing with a different name. There was We Who Are Not the Same, and that willingly was materializing not as a form, as a series of lectures or events, but as moments of togetherness and of exercising. So leaving open the fact that we were not coming there with concluded thoughts, but just to think together and to be unsettled also by each other's positions. In fact, our point of departure was being the acknowledgement of the deep, and now we could say afterwards that it was also productive and transformative disagreement on the meaning of the contemporary also balance of what feminisms was. So with Natalie Bicoro and Federica Buetti, we grounded our project on the belief that perhaps was exactly this what feminism was, a form of collective non-alignment. And therefore, through this series of exercises that unfolded during 2-3 years, we enacted multiple histories, multiple struggles and voices that define this idea of feminism as something that is both a practice and a concept. The project ended up with an exhibition. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It was called Ecologies of Darkness, but obviously also with a discursive program, and then actually continued to accompany me, yes, until today, because it resonated in a program that I did last summer, a series of conversations on radio that wondrously managed to condense most of the experiences that were opened up by this project. And I just mentioned that briefly because I think tomorrow in the workshop, we're going to talk about that more in particular. So these radio programs, I mean, it was a whole festival that I was curating, but here I want to mention just this series of kitchen table talks. You can see here on the second the audio track. There were, yes, moments in the morning on the roster of the radio where we were gathering and we were condensing space in the air for the discussions in front of coffees, in front of also bitter teas, talking about the struggles, the radical aspirations, the insurgent desires of different women, of course, with the X, but also people identifying as women, and with the aim of trying to unsettle the racist, homophobic, machist, transphobic structures that we inhabit, but also to reflect together on the possibility of repair and resilience. But these reflection around feminism that I started with that project, I mean, not just feminism, but how to make alliances and create networks of solidarities, also brought me to question the way we, the curators and the artwork, work together. We think infrastructurally. It brought me to think infrastructurally even more, to analyze the way we perform our labor, the kind of para-institution in becoming that we are wishing to enact. One that puts care work at its center and sees it as its main commons. One that counters the imperatives of late capitalism and neoliberal progress-driven modes of living and thinking. One also that enables accountability, that thinks about institutional ethics, teamwork methods, and internal diversity policies, and for repeatedly defining who the institution intends to address and to welcome and to work together with. So I asked Beatrice to try to play it, but I will try. I want to listen with you to a short bit of this very long conversation. That was the first iteration of this Kitchen Table Talks project. And before doing that, I want to just shortly giving you the framework of how this project came about. It was during the pandemic. We were obviously all locked home and forced to be home. And in that moment, yes, I was asked to curate a project. And I invited Karina Griffith to think about that with me and to, yes, unfold it as a curatorial project. And in that moment, we tried to, yes, to work around the concept of domesticity and also to understand how we could re-weaponize it. I want to read some thoughts that I noted down when rethinking about that project. I was saying that suddenly the domestic space that for a while to me and to my interlocutors, and I mean my friends, mothers, people that were searching for intimate and safe spaces where to share our vulnerability, Suddenly, this space there was a space of safety and intimacy, a space of plotting and of bridging experiences transformed. It might be, maybe it must be, that my subjective experience and even maybe psychoanalytical perspective on home is a very troubled one. I never, in fact, really felt home anywhere until I was an adult, and then a couple of times I tried to build a home, the entire structure fell, and then I also had to fall with it. So the domestic, therefore, embodies, maybe in my most unconscious understanding of it, a space of ambiguity, of claustrophobia, but of repair, of empowerment and possibility, but of danger. So in that moment, during locked home, moment of intense questioning and sudden re-emerging of unsettling feelings about the sense and the order of home, that very moment of deep immersion into it crystallized an urgency to think through the possibility of re-weaponizing the domestic space and continue building on feminist infrastructures of care. So, but when discussing with my friend and colleague Karina, we thought that this urgency should have materialized for her especially in a call to reconnect with the experience of the kitchen table press that was called the Women of Color Press, the activist, feminist and queer press funded by members of the Combahee River Collective upon the suggestion of Audre Lorde in the late 70s. A moment of exceptional force and of strong self-determination that kept inspiring women of color for decades, and that still represents one of the most seminal references and examples of emancipation and creation of new archives. So this was how our kitchen table, took shape. This daily format broadcasted on Reboot FM, as I said, and that allowed space for very early morning conversation in front of cups of coffee and in the face of the daily horrors and attacks on human decency that we were witnessing on the planet on those very days. It was the days after the assassination of George Floyd. It was the days in which it was becoming clearer and clearer how much these asymmetries that we are inhabiting and making every day stronger and stronger were even more evident in the time of the pandemic. And so exactly, I want to play now this little bit. Let me try myself. I get out of this one. It was a 1 hour and a half conversation, and I wanted now to play this very short bit to make you more aware in a more concrete way what I mean with this critical discomfort, because probably you will also understand from the air that you could cut with a knife that you will hear now in this coming seconds of this radio recording, that it was a bit intense, especially for me in that room with these very fierce women who were Natalie Bicaro, Kati Antan, and Karina Griffith herself. And we were together reflecting on the consequences of good intentions by going back to a text of Okwi and Desor that was reflecting on patronage. And actually we wanted to trouble a bit the perspective of the invitation of the institution that invited us to do this program. So.
And I sit here thinking about Audre Lorde, Barbara Smith, Sherry Moraga. I'm here with Karina, Elena, and Kati. And I think about this. What is the better way? if we're bound to be on a loop, on a repeat. Thierry Moraga writes, a theory in the flesh means one where the physical realities of our lives, our skin color, the land or concrete we grew up on, our sexual longings, all fuse to create a politic born of necessity. So I wonder, we've been hoping for a long time. It's not just the last decades, it's not just the last hundreds of years, it's been thousands of years, because we are still in a system of colonial entrepreneurship. It's still a trade, whether it's a European trade, an Arabic trade. And I wonder, what would be the better way? And I wonder, are we repeating this kitchen table? What is our better way? What are we doing to make it a better way? And I still think it has to do something with archives. Who is selected? Who is speaking? Who has the voice? Who remains? Also to avoid this kind of celebrity fix. Who are the ones that are inspiring us? The ones that are inspiring us are also the ones who are asking questions. Congo Thai, what does it mean? Congo Thai is an old saying. It comes from Central West Africa, mainly from the Congo Basin. And it survived through centuries of colonial slave trade. In the Caribbean, we say Congote, Congote. And it's a word, it's a sentence, it's a ritual that you say to give me my word, give me my space, give me the way. Because now I reclaim the space. The deeds that you have done against those marginalized will come back to you. So now you have to pay. The bird will come out of its pocket. And that is a form of resistance that people used to say in boats, in prisons, in plantations, in villages. And this is what I mean when I think about Okui, about the tribute economies. Who is giving? Who is the guest? Who is the host? Who is receiving? And I want to ask you this question. What is your narrative? How do you want to write yourself back into this history, into this one? How are people going to hear you? Because Congo Thai, sooner or later, the time of this reckoning will arrive, and then you will know, and then you will have your truth. So I want to know, Elena, what do you demand? I want to know, Karina, what do you want?
Me, I don't demand anything from you, but maybe I demand more from myself. I demand myself to remain vigilant and aware that each one of us, and especially each one of us in the positionality that I represent in this space now, has the capacity to harm and oppress. It's not enough just to deconstruct all deconstruct the position in which I am. I just try to question it constantly and to be aware. And also, I, for example, demand myself to shut up, for example, in this context and leave the space to you. As you're saying, you claim which are the voices that have to be in the archives. So,
and this is what Curtis Hayes demands.
I cannot.
This is what Curtis Hayes demands. The father that you heard in the video, who has a 5-year-old son, the same age as my son, that's what he demands. He said, this is not the way. We've been doing this for too long. This is our condition now. We are exhausted. That condition cannot be understood by privileged. No, cannot be understood. And this is exactly what he says now, what Audre Lorde has said, what Martin Luther King has said, what Malcolm X has said. All of them, every single one of them, leaders in our African continent too, they said this is the work of white people. Whether from 1900s to 2020, whether the virus is in your body, where you don't breathe anymore, this is a pandemic because it's affecting your privilege. But racism also doesn't allow us to breathe. Absolutely. And it's uncounted for. Historically, it's uncounted for. And that makes me sad, because I always believe that the hope is my voice, is my standing, is my walking with my sisters, with my brothers, with my family, with my friends, with my group. It's also you and me. I would have hoped that we could do this together. Now they are saying that this is the work of white people.
Yeah, I actually just wanted to bring to the fore this example that was for me another one of these moments, like chopping onion, in which suddenly without even knowing I was addressed in this public space that was supposed to be a space of intimacy where we were supporting each other, and it was quite, yes, quite, you could hear probably from my voice, quite uncomfortable. But this critical discomfort, of course, brought to even further reflections, because even if these are things that we always engage with, we always write about, think about, it's very different when, yes, you're really feeling it in a certain situation within your body and facing the very bold position of people that you esteem. So I want to conclude, because I know that time is getting over, but to conclude, I have to go back to the beginning and to these two queries that Nora was asking me. So the second point that I wanted to make, it's one about this infra-thing, the things that are happening in the relational moments of curating. I actually published again in this book that I showed you 2 times, a short text that is reflecting on the violence of the curatorial and the geometries of hospitality. I think that's the title, A Matter of Asymmetry. And because I'm not going to read my text to you, I'm not too self-focused to now stop the thing and start reading you my text, but I would like to read you 2 quotes that I used to open up the text and to introduce my thoughts. One is this one. This is not about us, the curators. This is not about where we are or what we do. Instead, this is about what happens between us. What I'm interested in is the performative aspects of the word curatorial and what its utterance does to the existing identificatory machine that endlessly consumes us. And this is a quote by Ye Yun Moon. I can send you her name later. But also another quote by Anna Tsing that reads, unpredictable encounters transform us. We are not in control even of ourselves. Unable to rely on a stable structure of community, we are thrown into shifting assemblages which remake us as well as our others. So when I've been asked, so what I mean with this performative and relational aspect of curating as a form of traveling, I think that I mean exactly this very possibility of engaging with the transformational power of these encounters and these collaborations that, as I actually in particular also analyzed in another project, the one called Agropoetics, that I curated with my colleague Marlene Boschen, collaboration that emerge in the face of the terrestrial distraction and the urgency of taking action. So believing in the possibility and possibilities of transformative encounters across species also, we posit collaboration and contamination as strategies against individualistic or individualizing logic of the biological imagination. Again, as Anna Singh attested, staying alive for every species requires livable collaborations. Collaboration means working across difference, which leads to contamination. Without collaboration, we all die. And I show you also to conclude again. Sorry, yeah? You're sharing, no? Ah, yes, sorry, I got distracted. Dove cavolo è? Okay, I don't manage to share it. I just conclude. It's not important. I wanted to show two posters that we did with this quote of Anna Singh, and they were beautiful, but it's not important. So staying alive, I was saying, requires livable collaboration. And curatorial practice unfolds also like a sharing of tactics, sharings of resources, sharings of knowledges, and of cultivating and building living spaces of emancipation and of liberation. And I could also conclude by going back to this text where I'm talking also about the importance of taking the risk. So curating also implies taking the risk that comes from the vulnerability of human sharing. A thing that is key to all hospitable encounters. And I leave it here.
Thank you so very much, Elena. Thanks a lot for sharing with us actually these moments of discomfort and inviting us in the moment of actually chopping onions and working with our own tears and questions and being troubled. Yeah, so I propose that just Elena and I, we just continue like with 1-2 questions, and then very soon we will open for all of you for questions, remarks, and thoughts.
Sure.
But my first question would be actually related to what you offered as very much to what you offered as your proposal of thinking the curatorial or curating, and what you actually bring on the table is a very complicated role that we have, and do I have to understand the curatorial invitation as always full of what you call hospitality? Is every curatorial invitation in somehow hostile? And if this is the case, how can we actually really bear that? Our last group, they have done these stickers, and on the stickers they wrote "Kuratier dich doch selbst," curate yourself. And there was something pretty understandable in it. As more and more curators come up with the idea of giving voice and sharing space, as if we could do that. I'm not even sure whose space we are actually sharing when we're kind of giving ourselves this generous role, while one clearly has to say that activists and artists did fight and existed long before curators as, these weird role even have ever been, invented by, let's say, neoliberal capitalism. So my question to you is hostility part of every curatorial invitation? And if this is the case, how can we actually work and deal and be within this violence of the curatorial?
Yes, thanks for the question. I think this is exactly what I tried to ponder with the text that actually I prepared a long time ago for this project that was happening in 2019, where I'm actually saying in most curatorial practices, there is, of course, embedded a space of hostility because of the asymmetries that curatorial practice is creating. There are obviously power positions that are different, and the curators is standing above because it's orchestrating the whole thing. But the issue is being very careful of not creating a situation in which the work of the artist, instead of being welcome and hosted, is hospitalized with too much editorial work, too much trying to fit to the aesthetics of the white cube or fit into the aesthetics of the discourse that you as curator want to portray. But being able, of course, to be bold in your curatorial proposal. It's not that I'm invoking just giving the space and not taking even the responsibility, but being accountable is also fundamental as curator. But just being sensitive and careful to hear and understand how to combine all these things. But also, another reflection that I would like to make is one about the complicitness often of curators with, yes, capitalist structures. I mean, unfortunately, we cannot hide the fact that we are criticizing something that sometimes we are even inhabiting. But as I was quoting before while reading Modest or Fred Moten, this criticality that comes from within and is able to subvert and sabotage the system, of course, anyway, could be, not always, but could be heuristic, and it's an aporia. There's not that there is just an answer, our curators to be just curating themselves or they are doing the good thing. Yes, it's complex, but thank you for the question.
Yeah, and actually you immediately came to my second one, and then I will stop to ask stuff, which actually, yeah, starts where you ended. And it's this, I thought maybe we can think a bit together about these cracks from within. I mean, if I listen to you right, I understand that we would actually understand curating as a way to take a certain role in the cultural field, to imagine together with others cracks from within. And what do we want? Do we want to I guess we want both. We want to agitate the existing ways to describe the world and canonizations, and we want to also imagine other ways to institutionalize or other ways to share the common. So how do you imagine with me a bit these cracks from within? How do you see that?
Yes, no, I think I agree that curating should be understood also as a form of troubling the public discourse, posing questions to answers that already exist and complicating this perspective. But at the same time, it should also allow having moments of suspension, of epoche, of also getting lost, but then experimenting together these otherwise, and not only thinking, okay, all it's wrong in the world, but then really using that space to try out. So repairing by connecting cables, connecting things, and seeing maybe an explosion happen, maybe something good comes out. We're not sure. We should experiment.
Thank you, Elena. So now the floor is really open for all of you. Please feel free to open your cameras, come up. Let's assemble. Let's think together if we can imagine some cracks, or maybe you just have some questions, thoughts, remarks. Please put your cameras on if you feel so. It could be nice to be together here and to think a bit.
I also see Joanna.
You are here, Joanna. That's so nice. Questions, thoughts, remarks, anyone? How many projects are you doing a year in Savi?
In Savi, we do maybe 6 exhibitions per year, but many other smaller side projects, series, many discursive platforms. And then, of course, on the top of that, yes, we all have to sustain ourselves with projects also outside, because, yeah, we are quite precarious, as you know. So it's many and multiple the trajectories, but luckily it is possible to hold one ground and to manage to focus on something that is somehow always the same reflections and the same experiments and the same struggles. With curating and teaching now is also becoming an important part of that, and obviously thinking together with the students and the artists, the thinkers that are participating in the different courses is always a blessing. So I'm sorry that this maybe was more a format of a lecture. So yes, you listen, then you're tired, huh? But usually when teaching, I really make it very participative, and I mean, in Zoom is not the best. It would be better sitting in a circle together and creating spaces of autocoscienza even. But yeah, that's the way I use.
There is now Andrea who actually raises her hand. So Andrea, please.
I'm not sure whether this really links to the overall topic of today's talk, but in the audio clip that you were playing, there was one moment where there was this saying of that privileged people will never be able to understand truly. Mm-hmm. And of course, on the one hand, I feel that that this trouble or pain of not being understood is crucial. But on the other hand, I have the feeling that, I mean, I have whether kind of this claim or this horizon of that something can be understood at all isn't very a high level of expectation that this can take place. But of course, I understand that there might be structural misunderstandings or structural inabilities to listen properly. But simply, I wanted to put this maybe, what is this kind of, what is an index of a structural of a misunderstanding that points to inequalities or structural dimensions, and when is there kind of this thing of productive misunderstandings that actually open spaces and allow for like that I work as an art educator, so I really work on misunderstandings. I think they are very good points to go on with any discussion. I work as an art educator, and there you are in conversation situations where misunderstandings are the most precious points of departure for opening up things. So I'm cherishing misunderstandings, but I understand that there are structural situations where you cannot be happy about being misunderstood all the time. And so I just wanted to put this into play. Maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit.
Yes, yes. Thank you for your question. I mean, I think we could talk about this issue of empathy and thinking that by attuning to the struggles of others, one is managing to perform empathy, when unfortunately, maybe after years of working with colleagues, friends, and people that are embodying a very different positionality from mine, I've been realizing how much sometimes it's really just impossible to even talk about empathy when the level of oppressions that each body has been living are very different. So the real problem is not the misunderstanding and the fact that you think you can understand the other one, but the problem of this arrogance, this hubris of thinking that you can understand. So if you stay with the with the trouble of knowing that you can connect, you can, of course, you do your work as the person and in the position that you're occupying as a citizen. Also, it's very important work for each of us, but you cannot think that you understand how painful it is for certain other people to live daily acts of oppression or violence. And I think these, when doing curatorial projects that are dealing with this anti-discriminatory practices, are always hitting back. And of course, the space of the possibility of making conflicts livable is fundamental. And I think Nora is also speaking about that often, and she was writing about that in her text on the Museum of Burning Questions. It is absolutely very fundamental, but we cannot think that these conflicts then are resolved just because they're making livable.
More questions, remarks? Yeah, Joanna. Hey, Joanna, nice to see you.
I'm in the family setting, that's why I'm hiding a little bit. Elena, thank you so much, really, for a really inspiring presentation or dialogue, acoustic dialogue also. Just one thing about, of course, the violence of curating, the violence of curating, and the fact that we need to rethink what we very often say, like, to give platforms to something. Who are we actually? Where do we think of us? Who are we to give those platforms? So this definitely needs to be rethought. But is there something you think which stays as a core of curating, which will, if we rethink everything, what is it curating actually good for? What is there that keeps us doing it? You spoke about accountability, responsibility. Maybe this is one thread. What is there what should stay, or what will be the core? Sorry,
thank you. And I love exactly that we are doing in some way this kitchen table, because you're sitting on the kitchen table. There are children, so that's beautiful. No, I think. I'm not the one who might be able to answer all these questions that you brought, but for sure what stays is exactly the work that has to be done. That is the one especially on the infrastructures, I think. So you said, who are we to create the spaces? Yes, and make these platforms. The problem is that there are platforms, there are structures that are already there, that are problematic, and that needs to be undone. And we as curator also have the responsibility of not just talking about this problem, the other one, the violence that is inscribed here and there, but to change the structures themselves. And this is probably what I was also trying to say in my lecture. We're talking about accountability as well, but when talking about the importance of, yes, activism from within. And yes. What do you say?
Yeah, well, I think that unlearning definitely is one of the direction, but no, for me the core is the responsibility. I think this is something that cannot be eliminated in a way, you know, that needs to drive the role and the profession further, and the rest I think really can be always, you know, rethought and should be rethought and should be restructured.
Yes, and in fact it's really a responsibility as well. So it's also a capacity of responding to the situation, the troubles at stake, but also taking it on our shoulders as a responsibility. Yes, I agree.
We have, as Elena said, 4 minutes left. So for the sake of a democratic discussion, I propose that nevertheless, anyone who still wants to say or ask something comes up now. No one. Okay, we are all very tired.
Yeah,
but,
me too, honestly.
But definitely it's a momentum. I mean, you brought something up on the table that we all think about, and we will not have an answer tonight. But the question is actually, curators, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? How can we go on knowing that the position that is given to us, like our curatorial subject position, is actually something we don't accept, or we don't want to accept, or we want to
trouble it.
Trouble, yeah. So I would say let's just not be subjectivized thusly, and let's know that we are not alone. Tonight we were more than 50, and we will be more and more.
Oh wow!
So
I didn't know.
Maybe that's a way to find an end for tonight, but it's only an end for tonight. We will all go on, I guess. Mm-hmm. And so it's my moment to say thank you to you, Elena. You made us think. You left onion feeling in my whole place here, and this will not go away so quickly. And I thank you all for being here with us tonight in front of your computers on another long Zoom day. And yeah, have a good evening, good night. And
thank you all. Ciao.
Thank you. Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.